The day I found out my sister Rebecca had convinced our parents to put her in charge of everything, I wasn't even invited to the meeting. I discovered it through a text message from my own father that simply read, "Your sister will be handling all family affairs going forward. Please direct any questions to her." 42 years of being their daughter, reduced to a corporate memo. I remember staring at my phone, the Chicago skyline framed through my apartment windows, feeling like I'd been slapped across the face. My hands trembled as I called my mother, hoping there was some misunderstanding. She answered on the fourth ring, her voice thin and distant. "Jennifer, now isn't a good time. Your father and Rebecca are discussing important matters." "Important matters about me? Without me?" I asked, my voice steadier than I felt. "It's about the business, the house, everything," my mother sighed. "Rebecca thinks it's best if she manages things given her experience." Experience. That's what they called it. Never mind that I'd spent 10 years building a successful career in financial consulting, helping clients manage portfolios worth millions. But to them, that counted for nothing compared to Rebecca's role as marketing director at Morgan's Hardware Supply, the family business she'd never left. I hung up without saying goodbye, a hollow feeling spreading through my chest. But what I didn't know then, what none of us knew, was that my mother had already set something in motion years ago, something that would change everything. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I always knew I was different from my sister. While Rebecca was content to follow the path our father had laid out, joining the family hardware business straight out of college, buying a house 3 blocks from our parents, attending the same church, I had always yearned for something more, something mine. That desire had led to countless arguments in the Morgan household, especially during my senior year of college when I announced I'd accepted a job in Chicago instead of coming back to Oakwood, Michigan. "You're abandoning your legacy," my father had said, his voice edged with disappointment. We were sitting around the kitchen table, the same oak surface where we'd eaten dinner every night of my childhood. 4 generations of Morgans built this business, and you're just walking away. "I'm not walking away from the family, Dad," I explained for what felt like the 100th time. "I'm just building my own path." Rebecca, always at his right hand, shook her head. "The business needs you, Jen. We all need you here." What they really meant was they needed me to conform, to fit into the role they'd assigned me since birth. Be a good Morgan. Follow tradition. Don't rock the boat. That night, as I packed my car to return to my final semester, my mother slipped into my bedroom. Eleanor Morgan had always been a quiet presence in our family, her opinions often overshadowed by my father's booming certainty. But there was something different about her that night, a resolve in her eyes I rarely saw. "Jennifer," she said, closing the door softly behind her, "I want you to know that I understand." I looked up, surprised. "Understand what?" "Why you need to go." She sat on the edge of my bed, smoothing the quilt she'd made for my 16th birthday. "Not everyone is meant to stay in one place forever." For a moment, I thought I might cry. After years of feeling like the family disappointment, here was one person who didn't see my choices as a betrayal. "Your father, he sees the world through the lens of what he knows," she continued. "The business has been his whole life. He can't imagine wanting anything different." "And you?" I asked. She smiled, a small, secretive thing. "I might have had other dreams once, but they were from a different time." She reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. "Just promise me you'll build something solid, Jennifer. Something that's truly yours." I nodded, not fully understanding the weight of her words at the time. How could I have known she was giving me the most important advice of my life? 10 years passed. I built a career in Chicago, working my way up from junior analyst to senior financial consultant. I helped clients grow their wealth, secure their futures, navigate market downturns. I was good at what I did, more than good, but none of that mattered when I returned to Oakwood for holiday dinners, where the conversation always circled back to the hardware business, with Rebecca eagerly sharing sales figures and expansion plans. I became an afterthought in those conversations. The Cree, daughter who left, the Morgan who broke tradition, and then came that text message on an ordinary Tuesday in April. Your sister will be handling all family affairs going forward. Please direct any questions to her. After the initial shock wore off, I did what any rational person would do. I called my sister. Rebecca, what's going on? I demanded when she answered. Jen, she sounded simultaneously smug and defensive. I was going to call you tonight. We had a family meeting about estate planning. A family meeting I wasn't invited to? She sighed dramatically. You're in Chicago. We didn't think you'd want to drive 4 hours for a meeting about the business and Mom and Dad's estate. So, instead, you made decisions about my inheritance without me. It's not like that, she said, though her tone suggested otherwise. Dad just wants someone local handling things, someone who understands the business. It makes sense for it to be me. The implication was clear. I had forfeited my right to a say when I chose to leave Oakwood. I had put myself outside the inner circle, and now I was paying the price. Does this mean I'm being cut out? I asked directly. No one said that, Rebecca replied too quickly. But things will be structured differently now. I'll be managing the trust, overseeing care for Mom and Dad as they age, making decisions about the business. Everything will still be fair. Fair, as defined by the people who thought I'd betrayed them by building my own life. After the call, I sat on my balcony for hours, watching the city lights flicker on as dusk settled over Chicago. I thought about calling my mother again, demanding more answers, but something stopped me. A memory of her face from that night in my bedroom 10 years ago. The resolve in her eyes, her words. Build something solid, Jennifer. Something that's truly yours. I had done exactly that. While my sister had nestled safely under our father's wing, I had ventured out, faced failures, celebrated victories, all on my own terms. If they wanted to punish me for that independence now, perhaps I needed to accept it and move forward. But 2 days later, everything changed. I was at work, prepping for a client meeting, when my phone rang. My mother's number. Jennifer. Her voice was hushed, urgent. I need you to come home this weekend. There's something important we need to discuss. Mom, what's going on? Are you okay? I'm fine, she said, though she didn't sound fine. But I need to see you, in person. And don't tell your father or sister that I called. The secrecy was unlike her. My mother had never been one for drama or intrigue. Whatever this was, it was serious. I'll be there Friday night, I promised. No, she countered immediately. Meet me at First Michigan Bank downtown at 10 a.m. Saturday. I'll be waiting in the lobby. Before I could ask more questions, she hung up. I arrived at the bank Saturday morning, having told my father and sister I was in town for a college friend's baby shower. My mother was already there, sitting primly, on a leather bench in the lobby, her purse clutched tightly in her lap. She looked smaller somehow, her shoulders slightly stooped in a way I hadn't noticed during my Christmas visit. Mom, I said, sitting beside her. What's going on? She glanced around nervously. We need to access my safety deposit box. 20 minutes later, we sat in a private viewing room, a metal box open between us. From it, my mother withdrew a sealed envelope with my name written on it in her neat cursive. I wrote this 5 years ago, she explained, handing it to me. After your father's first health scare. I updated it each year since. I took the envelope, confused, What is it? Insurance, she said simply. Your father and sister believe everything of value in this family is tied up in that hardware business. They're wrong. She reached into the box again, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I've been investing for decades, Jennifer. Small amounts at first, from household money I saved. Then larger sums as the investments grew. I stared at her, trying to reconcile this revelation with the woman I thought I knew, the quiet homemaker who deferred to my father on all financial matters. No one knows about this, she continued. Not your father, certainly not Rebecca. Just our family accountant, Mr. Finch, who helped me set everything up, and my lawyer, Thomas Caldwell. But why the secrecy? I asked. She smiled sadly. Your father would have seen it as a betrayal. Money not going back into the business? Investments he didn't control? He wouldn't have understood. She tapped the envelope in my hands. This explains everything. The accounts, the investments, what I want done with them. Her eyes met mine, steady and clear. Half is yours, Jennifer. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Not controlled by your sister, not tied to the business. Yours. I felt tears pricking at my eyes. Mom. The other half, she continued, is for Rebecca, but with conditions. She must use it to diversify beyond the hardware business. Your father has kept everything tied up in Morgan's for too long. It's too risky. I understood then what my mother had done. She had created a safety net, not just for herself, but for both her daughters. While my father focused solely on the business that bore his name, she had been quietly building security elsewhere. Why are you showing me this now? I asked. Her face tightened. Because of what your father and sister are planning. This estate arrangement they've created. It would funnel everything through Rebecca. I won't allow that to happen. She squeezed my hand. You deserve your fair share, Jennifer. Not because you stayed, but because you're my daughter. As we left the bank, my mother made me promise to keep our meeting secret. Let them think what they want for now, she said. Mr. Caldwell has all the necessary documents. When the time comes, everything will be revealed. I drove back to Chicago that afternoon with the sealed letter in my purse and a storm of emotions in my heart. My mother had seen me. Truly seen. Me, all along. While my father and sister interpreted my choices as rejection, she had recognized them as courage. For the first time in years, I felt connected to my family legacy. Not the hardware business that had been my father's obsession, but something deeper. The quiet strength of a woman who had created security and independence right under everyone's nose. I didn't know then how soon that strength would be tested. I didn't know that within 3 months our family would face a crisis that would bring all of my mother's planning into the light. I didn't know that Rebecca's control was about to be challenged in ways none of us could imagine. But as I crossed the state line back into Illinois, watching Michigan disappear in my rearview mirror, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt of being excluded, of being considered less worthy because I'd chosen my own path, began to recede. My mother had given me more than financial security. She had given me validation, and soon, very soon, the rest of my family would understand exactly what that meant. I returned to my Chicago apartment that evening, the city's familiar energy welcoming me home. I carefully placed my mother's letter in my own safe, next to my most important documents. Whatever came next, I knew one thing for certain. I would no longer doubt my place in the Morgan family. I had earned it, not by staying, but by having the courage to leave. My quiet confidence lasted exactly 3 weeks and 4 days. That's when I received a call from my father that shattered everything. Your mother's had a stroke, he said, his voice uncharacteristically fragile. You need to come home. I don't remember much about the drive to Oakwood. 4 hours of highway that blurred past as my mind raced with prayers and worst-case scenarios. By the time I arrived at Oakwood Memorial Hospital, my hands were cramped from gripping the steering wheel, and my eyes burned from holding back tears. Rebecca was already there, pacing the waiting room corridor in designer heels that echoed against the linoleum floor. She looked polished even in crisis, hair perfectly styled, makeup flawless. The contrast between us couldn't have been more stark. I'd thrown on jeans and a sweater, my hair hastily pulled into a ponytail. "Finally," she said when she spotted me, as though my 4-hour drive from Chicago had somehow been an inconvenience. "Dad's with the doctors now." "How bad is it?" I asked, ignoring her tone. Rebecca's expression softened slightly. "It's serious, Jen. They're talking about surgery to relieve pressure on her brain." My knees weakened. I sank into the nearest chair, trying to process this information. My mother, strong, steady Eleanor, who had secretly built an investment portfolio while making Sunday dinners and attending community fundraisers, was now fighting for her life. "Where did it happen?" I managed to ask. "At the bank, of all places," Rebecca replied, sitting beside me. She'd gone there alone. No one even knew she was planning to go out. The security guard found her collapsed in one of those private rooms where they keep safety deposit boxes. My heart stopped. The bank. Our secret meeting spot. Had she gone back for some reason? Had the stress of our family's situation somehow contributed to this? Before I could spiral further into guilt, my father appeared at the end of the corridor. Richard Morgan had always been an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a confidence born from decades of running his own business. But now he looked diminished, his face ashen, his shoulders slumped beneath his sports coat. "Girls," he said, and the simple word contained such weariness that tears sprang to my eyes. We both stood, moving toward him in perfect synchrony for, perhaps the first time in our adult lives. "They're taking her into surgery," he continued. "They need to..." His voice broke. "They need to relieve pressure from the bleed." I reached for his hand. It felt cold, almost fragile in mine. "She's going to fight," I said with as much conviction as I could muster. "Mom's stronger than all of us." My father nodded, but his eyes held a fear I'd never seen before. In that moment, I realized something fundamental about Richard Morgan. For all his bluster about tradition and family legacy, his true foundation had always been my mother. She was the bedrock upon which everything else stood. The next 16 hours were the longest of my life. We took turns pacing the surgical waiting room, drinking terrible coffee, and sitting in uncomfortable silence. Rebecca made business calls in hushed tones from the corner. My father stared at the wall, occasionally accepting calls from old friends and business associates who'd heard the news. I sat with my thoughts, trying not to drown in the weight of what-ifs. What if I had never left Oakwood? What if I had pushed back harder against my sister's takeover of the estate? What if my mother's secret financial planning had somehow led to this moment? The surgeon finally appeared well after midnight, still in her scrubs, looking exhausted but composed. "Mr. Morgan?" she called, and my father lurched to his feet. Rebecca and I followed, forming a tight circle around the doctor. "Your wife has made it through surgery," she began, and I felt my father's body sag with relief beside me. "We've managed to stop the bleeding and reduce the pressure, but I need to be very clear. The next 72 hours are critical. The stroke was significant, and there's substantial damage to the left side of her brain." "What does that mean?" Rebecca asked, her professional armor cracking slightly. "Will she recover?" The surgeon's expression was kind but unflinching. "It's too early to make predictions. Best case scenario, she'll need months of rehabilitation. Speech therapy, physical therapy, occupational therapy. She may recover many functions, but there will likely be permanent changes." "And worst case?" My father's voice was barely audible. "Let's focus on getting through the next 3 days," the doctor said gently. "She's fighting hard." We were allowed to see her briefly in the ICU, one at a time. When my turn came, I barely recognized the woman in the hospital bed. My mother's face was swollen, half of it drooping unnaturally. A ventilator breathed for her, tubes and wires connecting her to monitors that beeped and flickered with the mechanical measure of her life. Her hair, always carefully styled, had been partially shaved for the surgery. I took her hand, careful, to avoid dislodging the IV. "Mom," I whispered, leaning close to her ear. "I'm here. We're all here. You just rest and get better, okay?" I swallowed hard. "I got your letter. I understand what you were trying to do, but I need you to wake up so we can talk about it." Her fingers remained limp in mine, but I like to think that somewhere, deep in her mind, she heard me. The next 3 days blurred together in a haze of hospital routines. Rebecca took charge of organizing a schedule, making sure one of us was always at the hospital. My father seemed incapable of leaving, sleeping in the ICU waiting room chair and only going home to shower when the nurses gently insisted. On the 4th day, they removed the ventilator. My mother began breathing on her own, a small victory that felt monumental. By the end of the week, she was opening her eyes, though the doctors cautioned us that awareness and comprehension were different things. It was during this time that the cracks in our family's facade began to widen into chasms. One evening, as I returned to the hospital after a quick trip to my parents' house to gather fresh clothes for my father, I overheard Rebecca and him in deep conversation in the family waiting room. "We need to consider what happens if Mom doesn't recover fully," Rebecca was saying, her voice low but intense. "The power of attorney documents we signed put me in charge, but they won't help with day-to-day operations at the store." "The store?" My father sounded confused. "Rebecca, your mother is fighting for her life." "I know that," she said quickly. "Of course that's our priority. But the business still needs to run. Bills still need to be paid. Someone needs to make decisions." "I can still make decisions," my father said, a hint of his old authority returning. "Dad, you haven't left this hospital in a week. The regional manager from Anderson Supply has called 3 times about our outstanding order. The quarterly taxes are due next week. And that's just the business. What about the house? The investments? Everything else?" There was a long pause. "You're right," he finally conceded, his voice hollow. "You handle it. Do whatever needs to be done." I stepped into the room then, unable to listen any longer. Both turned to look at me, my father with exhaustion, Rebecca with something almost like guilt. "How long have you been standing there?" she asked defensively. "Long enough," I replied, setting down the duffel bag with my father's clothes. "Rebecca, can I talk to you? Privately?" My sister hesitated, then nodded. We walked to the small hospital garden, a pathetic collection of benches and withered plants under fluorescent lighting. "You can't seriously be thinking about business right now," I said once we were alone. Rebecca's eyes flashed. "Someone has to. The world doesn't stop turning because Mom is sick." "She's not just sick, Becky. She had a massive stroke. She might never be the same again." "You don't think—" "I know that." For the first time, I saw genuine fear beneath my sister's composed exterior. "That's exactly why we need to make sure everything else stays on track. When she recovers, she needs to have a home and a business to come back to." I took a deep breath, wondering how much to reveal. My mother's letter had been explicit. Keep the investment secret until she told me otherwise. But circumstances had changed dramatically. "There's more to consider than just the business," I said carefully. "What's that supposed to mean?" I hesitated. "Mom has other assets, investments outside the business." Rebecca stared at me. "What are you talking about?" She told me about them when I was here last month. She's been investing independently for years. My sister's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief to something harder. That's ridiculous. Mom doesn't know the first thing about investing. Dad handles all their finances. That's what everyone was meant to think, I replied. But it's not true. She has a substantial portfolio, enough to secure both our futures, regardless of what happens with the business. Rebecca's face flushed. You're making this up. You're trying to insert yourself into family matters now that Mom is vulnerable. The accusation stung, but I kept my voice level. I'm not making anything up. She showed me documentation. She has accounts, investments, everything managed through her personal lawyer. Her lawyer? Mom doesn't have a lawyer. Thomas Caldwell. He's been handling her affairs for years. Rebecca crossed her arms tightly. If any of this were true, why would she tell you and not me? I'm the one who stayed. I'm the one who's been helping run things. There it was, the core of the resentment that had been festering between us for a decade. In Rebecca's mind, staying in Oakwood made her more deserving, more loyal, more Morgan. She told me because she wanted to ensure I was protected, I said simply. She knew about the estate planning you and Dad were doing. She didn't agree with all of it. My sister's eyes narrowed. So what? You're going to use Mom's illness to try and take control? Is that it? That's not what this is about, Rebecca. This is about honoring Mom's wishes and making sure both of us are taken care of, the way she intended. I don't believe you, she said flatly. And I'm not going to let you manipulate Dad while he's vulnerable. He's already signed the papers making me executor of the estate. That's legally binding. I could have argued further. Could have mentioned the letter locked in my safe in Chicago. But something stopped me. This wasn't the time or place for a power struggle. My mother was still critically ill, her future uncertain. Adding family discord to that seemed cruel. We don't have to resolve this now, I said finally. Let's focus on Mom's recovery, but I'm not making this up, Rebecca. And when the time comes, you'll see that. She turned away without another word, walking briskly back into the hospital. I remained in the garden, trying to calm the storm of emotions raging inside me. Anger at my sister's dismissal, fear for my mother, uncertainty about what came next. As the weeks passed, my mother's condition stabilized enough for her to be moved to a rehabilitation facility. The stroke had left her with significant aphasia. She struggled to form words, often knowing what she wanted to say but unable to express it. The right side of her body was weakened, requiring intensive physical therapy. But her cognitive abilities remained largely intact, a blessing the doctors called remarkable. I took a leave of absence from my job in Chicago, renting a small apartment near the rehabilitation center in Oakwood. Rebecca maintained her grip on the family business, stepping into our father's role as he spent most days at my mother's. Sighed. The dynamic between us remained tense, neither of us bringing up our conversation about the investments. It was during this time that I received an unexpected call from Thomas Caldwell, my mother's lawyer. Ms. Morgan, his voice was formal, professional. I understand your mother has suffered a serious health event. Yes, I confirmed, wondering how he'd heard the news. She's in rehab now, recovering from a stroke. I see. There was a measured pause. Given the circumstances, I believe it's appropriate for us to meet. Your mother left specific instructions for this eventuality. My heart raced. What kind of instructions? I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Can you come to my office tomorrow morning? I agreed, curiosity and apprehension battling for dominance in my mind. Caldwell and Associates occupied the third floor of a modest office building in downtown Oakwood. Thomas Caldwell himself was a surprise. Younger than I expected, perhaps in his early 40s, with wire-rimmed glasses and a serious demeanor. Thank you for coming, Ms. Morgan, he said, shaking my hand firmly before gesturing me to a seat across from his desk. I've been your mother's attorney for nearly 15 years. I only learned about you recently, I admitted. He nodded, unsurprised. Eleanor was very private about her financial affairs, even from her family, especially from her family in some respects. He withdrew a thick file from his desk drawer. Your mother anticipated that a day might come when she would be unable to manage her own affairs. She left explicit instructions about what should happen in that event. He opened the file, removing a sealed envelope similar to the one my mother had given me at the bank. This is for you. She updated it quarterly. I took it, fighting the urge to open it immediately. There's more, Caldwell continued. Your mother executed a separate power of attorney document, different from the one your father and sister arranged. It names you as her financial agent in the event of her incapacity. I stared at him. Me? Not my father? Not your father, he confirmed. Eleanor was quite clear about this. She wanted you to manage her personal assets, specifically the investment portfolio she built independently of the family business. He slid a formal-looking document across the desk. This gives you legal authority to make decisions regarding those assets. It does not override the arrangements regarding the family business or your parents' home, but it does give you control over approximately $7 million in investments and liquid assets. The figure knocked the breath from my lungs. $7 million? When did she? Your mother was an extremely savvy investor, Caldwell said, a hint of admiration creeping into his professional tone. She began with small amounts in the 1980s. Conservative investments at first, then increasingly diversified as her confidence grew. She had a particular talent for identifying emerging markets before they became mainstream. I thought about the quiet woman who had sat at our dinner table for decades, listening to my father's pronouncements about business with a gentle smile. All those years, that same woman had been building her own financial empire in secret. Does my father know about any of this? I asked. No, Caldwell said simply. Your mother was adamant that this remained separate from the family business. She felt your father was too tied to Morgan's hardware, emotionally and financially. She wanted security that wasn't dependent on a single enterprise. I nodded slowly, understanding dawning. My mother hadn't just been creating a safety net. She'd been crafting an escape route, not just for herself, but for her daughters as well. There's one more thing, Caldwell added, his expression grave. Your mother was concerned about how your sister might react to these arrangements. She left specific instructions that Rebecca should receive half of these assets, but only under certain conditions. What conditions? The funds must be invested outside the family business. Your sister cannot use them to prop up Morgan's hardware or to buy out other family members' interests. Your mother was quite explicit about this. She wanted these assets to provide security independent of the business. I almost laughed, despite the seriousness of the situation. My mother had outmaneuvered us all, while my father and sister had been arranging to consolidate control of the family business. She had been quietly ensuring that both her daughters would have options beyond it. What happens next? I asked. That's largely up to you, Caldwell replied. You have legal authority to manage these assets now. You could disclose their existence to your father and sister immediately, or you could wait until your mother recovers enough to participate in that conversation. I thought about Rebecca's dismissive reaction when I'd mentioned the investments, about my father's single-minded focus on the business. I thought about my mother, working so hard in rehabilitation to regain her speech, her movement, her independence. I'll wait, I decided. My mother deserves to be part of this conversation when she's ready. Caldwell nodded approvingly. In the meantime, I suggest you familiarize yourself with the portfolio. The management company has done an excellent job, but as the new financial agent, you should understand what you're overseeing. I left his office with a thick folder of financial statements, the sealed letter from my mother, and a profound sense that the ground beneath my family had shifted irrevocably. For years, I had felt like an outsider, the Morgan who left, who didn't understand family values. Now I realized that my mother had seen something in me that even I hadn't fully recognized, an independence that mirrored her own. As I drove to the rehabilitation center for my daily visit with her, I felt a strange mixture of grief and pride. Grief for the vibrant woman now struggling to form simple sentences. Pride in the silent strength she had demonstrated for decades. When I arrived at her room, I found her sitting up in a chair by the window, a speech therapist working patiently with her on pronunciation exercises. She smiled when she saw me, a lopsided smile due to the facial paralysis, but unmistakably warm. Jen, she managed, the effort evident in her furrowed brow. "Hi, Mom," I said, leaning down to kiss her cheek. "How's therapy going today?" The therapist answered for her. "Mrs. Morgan is making excellent progress. Her comprehension is nearly perfect, and her word finding is improving daily." My mother nodded, gesturing for the therapist to give us a moment alone. When the woman had left, my mother reached for my hand, squeezing it with her good side. Caldwell," she said, the word labored but clear. My eyebrows shot up. "You knew I was meeting him today?" She nodded. "The investments, the power of attorney? Mom, why didn't you tell Dad about all this?" She frowned, frustration crossing her face as the words wouldn't come. Finally, she tapped her chest, then pointed at me. "You..." "Me?" I guessed. She nodded, then made a protective gesture, as if cradling something precious. "You were protecting me," I translated. Another nod, more emphatic. "From what, Mom?" "From who?" She pointed toward the door, where my father and sister would arrive for their visit later. "From Dad and Rebecca?" I asked, my voice dropping to a whisper even though we were alone. She shook her head, then mimed something growing bigger, expanding. "The business?" She nodded, relief in her eyes at being understood. I sat back, considering. "This. You were protecting me from being swallowed up by the business, from having no options." She squeezed my hand again, her eyes shining with unshed tears. In that moment, I realized that my mother's financial planning hadn't just been about money. It had been about freedom, the freedom to choose, to leave, to build something new. The same freedom she had supported when I moved to Chicago, when I built my career away from Morgan's hardware. "Does Dad suspect anything?" I asked. She shook her head, then pointed to her wedding ring, then made a sleeping gesture. "He's been in the dark? Asleep?" I guessed. She nodded, a hint of her old mischievous smile appearing. "And now? Do you want me to tell them about the investments? About the power of attorney?" Her expression turned serious. She shook her head, firmly, then pointed to herself. "You want to tell them yourself, when you're ready." She nodded, relief evident in her expression. "Okay," I promised. "I'll wait until you're ready. But Mom, Rebecca is taking control of everything else. The business, the house, Dad's letting her make all the decisions." My mother's expression hardened slightly. She pointed to the folder I'd placed on her bed, the one from Caldwell's office. "The investments are safe," I acknowledged. "But what about everything else?" She squeezed my hand again, her gaze intense despite her physical limitations. Then she pointed to me, made a waiting gesture, and finally a triumphant fist. The message was clear. Wait. Be patient. Victory will come. 3 months after my mother's stroke, a new rhythm had established itself in our family. I split my time between my rented apartment in Oakwood and my mother's rehabilitation center, working remotely for my Chicago firm when I could. Rebecca maintained her iron grip on the family business, extending her reach into every aspect of my parents' lives. My father seemed to shrink a little more each day. his confidence eroding as he watched my mother struggle through therapies that offered slow, incremental progress. And through it all, I kept my mother's secret. The investment portfolio stayed hidden. The power of attorney document locked away in my temporary apartment. I honored her wishes, waiting for her to indicate she was ready to reveal the truth. That day came sooner than I expected. It was an unremarkable Tuesday afternoon. I arrived at the rehabilitation center to find my mother working with her occupational therapist, practicing buttoning a cardigan, a simple task made challenging by her weakened right hand. Her face lit up when she saw me, and she gestured for me to wait while she finished the session. When the therapist left, my mother pointed to her communication notebook, a system suggested by her speech therapist to help bridge the gap between her thoughts and her limited verbal abilities. She could write with her left hand now, the letters, shaky but legible. She flipped to a blank page and wrote slowly, "Time to tell them." I sat beside her, surprised by the sudden decision. "Are you sure? Your speech is still—" She cut me off with a firm gesture, writing again. "Family meeting. Friday. Here. All of us? Dad and Rebecca too?" She nodded, determination evident in the set of her jaw. "Okay," I agreed. "I'll arrange it." She wrote again, the letters more hurried. "Bring Caldwell." That raised my eyebrows. "You want your lawyer present?" "Mom, that's going to immediately set Rebecca on edge." My mother's expression didn't waver. She pointed to what she'd written and underlined it twice. "All right," I conceded. "I'll call him. Friday afternoon?" She nodded, then reached for my hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. The message was clear. It was time to shift the balance of power. The next 3 days passed in a flurry of arrangements. I called Caldwell, who agreed to attend the meeting without hesitation. I informed my father and Rebecca that Mom wanted a family gathering at the rehab center, carefully omitting the lawyer's involvement. Rebecca immediately questioned why Mom hadn't told her directly. "She asked me to coordinate," I explained simply. "Friday at 3 works for everyone." "I'll have to move some meetings," Rebecca said, the annoyance evident in her voice. "The regional distributor is coming to discuss our fall inventory. I'm sure they'll understand. This is important to—" "Mom, fine," she conceded, "but it needs to be quick. I can't spend all afternoon there." I bit back a retort about priorities. Some battles weren't worth fighting. Yet. When Friday arrived, I got to the rehabilitation center early, helping my mother prepare. The staff had arranged for us to use a small conference room rather than her room, providing privacy for whatever was about to unfold. "Are you nervous?" I asked as I helped her adjust her position in the wheelchair. She shook her head, then wrote in her notebook, "Ready." My father arrived next, kissing my mother's cheek tenderly before sitting beside her. He looked older than his 68 years, the strain of the past months etched into the lines of his face. "You're looking stronger, Ellie," he said, his voice gentle. "The therapists say you're making wonderful progress." My mother smiled at him, patting his hand. Despite everything, the secrets, the separate financial lives they'd been living, there was genuine affection between them. I wondered how that would weather what was coming. Rebecca arrived precisely at 3, dressed in a tailored suit that screamed professional authority. She nodded curtly to me before bending to kiss our mother's cheek. "I can only stay about 45 minutes, Mom," she said, "but I'm glad you wanted to see us all together. Is this about coming home? Have the doctors given you a timeline?" Before anyone could respond, the door opened once more, and Thomas Caldwell stepped in, briefcase in hand. The reaction was immediate. "Who's this?" my father asked, frowning. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What's going on here?" My mother straightened in her wheelchair, her good hand reaching for her communication notebook. She wrote quickly, then turned, it so everyone could see. "My lawyer." Your lawyer? My father looked bewildered. Eleanor, you don't have a lawyer. All our legal matters go through Jim Parsons at the firm that handles the business. She shook her head firmly, then pointed to Caldwell, who stepped forward. Mr. Morgan? Ms. Morgan? He addressed my father and sister. I'm Thomas Caldwell. I've been representing Eleanor Morgan's personal legal interests for the past 15 years. Rebecca shot a venomous look my way. You knew about this. I met her gaze steadily. Yes. And you didn't think to mention it? It wasn't my place to tell you, I replied calmly. This is Mom's business. Mom's business is family business, Rebecca snapped. Not always, I said, my voice low but firm. My mother tapped her notebook sharply, regaining everyone's attention. She'd written a new message. Listen. Important. The room fell silent. My mother pointed to Caldwell, who opened his briefcase. Mrs. Morgan has asked me to explain several matters regarding her personal financial affairs. He began, his tone professionally neutral. First, I should clarify that while Mr. Morgan has been managing the family business and the assets directly tied to it, Mrs. Morgan has maintained a separate portfolio of investments for many years. My father's expression shifted from confusion to disbelief. What are you talking about? Eleanor doesn't have separate investments. I assure you she does, Mr. Morgan, Caldwell continued smoothly. Beginning in 1982, Mrs. Morgan established her own investment accounts using funds from her inheritance from her grandmother and her earnings from part-time bookkeeping work. He removed a folder from his briefcase, placing it on the table. These investments have grown considerably over the years. The current value of Mrs. Morgan's personal portfolio is approximately $7 million. The silence that followed was deafening. My father stared at the lawyer as though he'd started speaking an alien language. Rebecca's mouth opened and closed, without producing sound. That's impossible, my father finally managed. I would have known. My mother shook her head, writing again. My money, my choice. But why? He asked, voice breaking slightly. Why keep this from me? From us? She wrote slowly, deliberately. Security, independence, future for girls. The future of our girls is the business, my father replied, an edge creeping into his tone. Morgan's hardware is their inheritance. It's what my father built, what I expanded. My mother shook her head again, more forcefully this time. She wrote quickly, business not everything. Girls need options. Rebecca finally found her voice. This is ridiculous. The business is everything. It's our family legacy. It's what I've dedicated my life to. Your choice, my mother wrote, underlining the last word twice. She pointed to me, then wrote, her choice different, both valid. Rebecca's face flushed. So this is about Jen? About the fact that she left? My mother's expression hardened. She wrote again, about both my daughters, equal. Caldwell cleared his throat. If I may continue, there's more to discuss. All eyes returned to him. Following Mrs. Morgan's stroke, certain legal mechanisms she put in place have been activated. Specifically, she executed a power of attorney document that names Jennifer as her financial agent for these personal assets. My father turned to me, betrayal stark in his eyes. You knew about this all along. Not all along, I clarified. I only learned about the full extent of Mom's investments after her stroke. Rebecca stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. This is absurd. While I've been keeping the business running, taking care of Dad, managing everything, you two have been conspiring behind our backs? No one was conspiring, Rebecca, I said, keeping my voice level. Mom made these arrangements years ago, long before any of this happened, and she has every right to manage her own assets however she sees fit. Assets that should have been contributing to the family business, she shot back. Do you have any idea how close Morgans came to a cash flow crisis last year? Dad and I had to secure a line of credit against the house to make payroll during the slow season. Meanwhile, Mom's sitting on millions? My mother was writing again, her hand moving rapidly across the page. Business your passion, not mine, not Jen's. So you just decided to cut the business out? My father asked, his voice low and hurt. After all these years? My mother shook her head, frustration evident as she struggled to communicate the complexity of her thoughts through written words. She wrote again. Love you. Love girls. Wanted choices. Caldwell intervened. Mrs. Morgan has asked me to explain that she never intended to undermine the family business. Rather, she wanted to ensure financial security that wasn't dependent on a single enterprise. It's a standard diversification strategy. There's nothing standard about hiding assets from your husband for 40 years, my father said bitterly. My mother's eyes flashed. She wrote in large letters, not hiding, protecting. Protecting from what? Rebecca demanded. From us? My mother pointed to her notebook where she'd written, from risk, from control. The word control hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. Rebecca's face darkened as she recognized the implication. So you think I'm controlling? That's rich coming, from someone who's been manipulating this family from the shadows. Rebecca, I intervened. That's not what Mom means. Isn't it? She challenged. She gives you power of attorney over millions without even discussing it with Dad. If that's not manipulation, I don't know what is. My mother was writing. Again, her movements forceful enough that the pen tore slightly through the paper. Both get half, equal. Caldwell nodded. That's correct. Mrs. Morgan's instructions are very clear. The portfolio is to be divided equally between her daughters, with certain conditions. What conditions? Rebecca asked, suspicion evident in her tone. The primary condition is that these funds cannot be used to prop up or acquire additional interests in Morgan's hardware, Caldwell stated plainly. Mrs. Morgan specified that these assets are meant to provide financial security independent of the family business. Rebecca laughed, the sound sharp and disbelieving. So she specifically excluded the business. The thing I've dedicated my life to? Not excluded, I corrected. She just didn't want the funds tied to a single enterprise. It's sound financial planning, Becky. Diversification protects everyone. Don't call me Becky, she snapped. And don't pretend this is about financial planning. This is about Mom playing favorites. My mother slapped her good hand against the table, the sound sharp enough to silence everyone. She pointed to her notebook where she'd written, no favorites. Equal love, different needs. Different needs, Rebecca repeated mockingly. Right, because little Jen always needed special treatment. My father, who had been unnaturally quiet, finally spoke. Eleanor, how could you do this? All these years, I thought we were partners. The pain in his voice seemed to reach my mother in a way Rebecca's anger hadn't. Her expression softened, and she wrote slowly, always partners, always loved you, needed something mine. But why the secrecy? He pressed. Why not tell me? She hesitated, then wrote, would you have allowed it? The question hung in the air, uncomfortable in its accuracy. My father had always controlled the family finances, always made the final decisions about money. We all knew the answer. That's not fair, he said finally. I would have understood. My mother's expression was gentle but unwavering as she wrote, no business always first for you. The truth of her words seemed to deflate him. He sat back, looking suddenly every one of his 68 years. Caldwell, sensing the emotional tension, shifted to a more pragmatic tone. Moving forward, Mrs. Morgan has asked me to outline how these matters will be handled. Jennifer, as financial agent, will oversee the portfolio for now. However, Mrs. Morgan retains final decision-making authority as her recovery continues. And the business? My father asked, his voice hollow. What about Morgan's? The family business remains as it was, Caldwell clarified. These arrangements only pertain to Mrs. Morgan's personal assets. The recent estate planning you and Rebecca implemented for the business assets remains unchanged. A small comfort, but my father seemed to latch onto it, nodding slowly. Rebecca, however, was not appeased. This is ridiculous. I'm calling Jim Parsons. We need our own lawyer present before this goes any further. My mother shook her head firmly, writing, decided, legal, final. Mom, you can't just spring this on us and expect everyone to accept it, Rebecca protested. This affects all of us. Actually, Caldwell interjected, legally speaking, these decisions were Mrs. Morgan's to make. The assets in question are solely in her name, established with funds that were indisputably hers. Rebecca turned to our father. Dad, are you going to let this happen? After everything we've done to secure the family legacy? My father looked at my mother, 46 years of marriage seeming to pass between them in a silent exchange. Your mother has always been smarter than people gave her credit for, he said finally, a hint of rueful admiration in his voice. If this is what she wants, then I need to respect that. You can't be serious, Rebecca said, incredulous. I am, he replied quietly. I don't like how it was done, but these are Ellie's assets to manage as she sees fit. Rebecca turned to me, anger radiating from her. You engineered this. You swooped back in after 10 years away and somehow convinced Mom to cut the business out. I didn't engineer anything, I replied evenly. Mom made these decisions long before her stroke, long before I knew anything about them. Convenient timing, though, isn't it? She countered. Right after Dad. And I set up the estate plan. Suddenly Mom has a stroke and you're in control of millions. The implication was so outrageous that it left me momentarily speechless. My mother, however, was not. She slammed her hand down again, then wrote in large, deliberate letters, Jennifer Innocent. My choice. Rebecca ignored her, continuing her verbal assault. You never cared about the business, about Dad's legacy, about what it means to be a Morgan. You left the first chance you got, and now you're being rewarded for it. This isn't a reward, Rebecca, I said, struggling to keep my composure. It's a responsibility, one that Mom entrusted to me because she knew I would respect her wishes, just like she trusts you with the business. It's not the same thing. You're right, I agreed. It's not, because while you've been positioning yourself to take control of everything, Mom was making sure both her daughters would be provided for equally. Rebecca's eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? I hadn't intended to go this far, but Rebecca's accusations had pushed me past the point of diplomacy. It means I've seen the estate plan you and Dad signed. The one that gives you controlling interest in the business, power of attorney over all Dad's assets, and executor status for both wills. The one that effectively sidelines me from any meaningful say in the family's affairs. My father had the grace to look uncomfortable. Jennifer, that wasn't about excluding you. It was about practicality. You live in Chicago. The business is here. The business is here, I acknowledged, but family decisions should involve all family members no matter where they live. My mother was nodding emphatically, pointing to what I'd said as if to underscore it. Rebecca's phone chimed, breaking the tension momentarily. She glanced at it, then stood. I have to go. The regional distributor is waiting. She looked at our mother. We'll discuss this later, when you're thinking more clearly. The condescension in her tone made me flinch, but before I could respond, my mother wrote again. My mind clear. My decision final. Rebecca gathered her things, pointedly ignoring Caldwell. "Dad, are you coming?" My father hesitated, looking between his daughters and his wife. "I think I'll stay with your mother a while longer." Rebecca's lips thinned, but she nodded curtly and left without another word. The silence that followed her departure felt charged with unspoken emotions. Caldwell, sensing that family matters needed to be discussed privately, made his excuses and left as well, promising to follow up the next day. When the door closed behind him, my father turned to my mother, his expression a complex mixture of hurt and admiration. "All these years," he said softly, "you were building something completely separate from me, from us." My mother reached for her notebook, writing slowly, "Not separate, parallel, additional, safety." "Safety from what, Ellie? Did you think I wouldn't provide for you, for the girls?" She shook her head, writing, "Different kind of safety. Freedom to choose." He considered this, nodding slowly. "Like Jennifer chose to leave." My mother nodded, writing, "Her path, her strength." "And Rebecca?" he asked, "Also strong, different. Way." She paused, then added, "Too much like you, single-minded." I couldn't help but smile at the gentle critique. My father saw it, and, surprisingly, a small smile lifted the corner of his mouth as well. "I suppose I deserved that," he admitted. He turned to me. "I never meant to push you away, Jennifer. I just couldn't understand why you'd want anything different from what we had built." "I know, Dad," I said softly. "But I needed to find my own way, my own success." "And you have," he acknowledged. "Your mother always said you would." The admission warmed something in me that had been cold for a very long time. She believed in me, even when it wasn't the path you wanted. "She's always been wiser than me," he said, reaching for my mother's hand. Though I never expected her to be quite this financially savvy behind my back. There was no bitterness in his voice now, just a kind of wondering respect. My mother's smile was triumphant as she wrote, "Surprise." "Rebecca won't accept this easily," I warned. "She sees it as a betrayal." My father sighed. "Your sister has always struggled with things she can't control. She'll come around eventually when she realizes your mother's decision doesn't threaten her position with the business." "And you, Dad?" I asked tentatively. "Are you okay with all this?" He was quiet for a long moment, looking at my mother with eyes that held decades of shared history. "Your mother has earned the right to make her own choices. I won't pretend I'm happy about being kept in the dark all these years, but I understand why she did it." He squeezed her hand gently. "You always did see further ahead than the rest of us, Ellie." My mother's eyes shimmered with unshed tears as she wrote one last message. "Family stronger now. Truth out." I wanted to believe her. I wanted to think that this revelation, though painful, would ultimately strengthen our family bonds rather than sever them. But as I thought of Rebecca's angry departure, of the decades of secrets and the sudden shift in power dynamics, I wasn't entirely convinced. What I didn't know then was that the real test was still to come, and that my sister had no intention of accepting defeat so easily. The aftermath of my mother's revelation rippled through our family like a stone thrown into still water. For 2 weeks, Rebecca refused to speak to me, communicating only through terse text messages when absolutely necessary for our mother's care. My father vacillated between quiet acceptance and moments of wounded pride, struggling to reconcile. The woman he thought he knew with the financial strategist she had revealed herself to be. My mother, for her part, seemed liberated by the disclosure. Though her speech remained halting and imprecise, her eyes were clearer than I'd seen them since before the stroke. No longer carrying the weight of her long-held secret, she threw herself into her rehabilitation with renewed vigor. progressing faster than her therapists had anticipated. I divided my time between the rehabilitation center, meetings with Caldwell to understand the full scope of my responsibilities as my mother's financial agent, and remote work for my Chicago firm. It was exhausting but purposeful. The first time in years I felt truly connected to my family, even through the tension. Then came the Friday evening when everything shifted again. I was at my temporary apartment, reviewing quarterly reports from my mother's investment portfolio, when there was a knock at the door. Opening it, I was surprised to find my father standing in the hallway, a bottle of red wine in one hand. "Dad?" I said, startled. "Is everything okay? Is Mom?" "Your mother's fine," he interrupted gently. "She's having her weekly card game with the ladies from her church. I thought maybe we could talk, just the two of us." I hesitated only briefly, before stepping aside to let him in. We hadn't had a real conversation, just the two of us, in longer than I could remember. The apartment was small but comfortable, a furnished short-term rental with generic decor and just enough personality to avoid feeling like a hotel. My father glanced around, taking in the space, then gestured with the wine bottle. "I brought a peace offering, if you're interested." I nodded, fetching 2 glasses from the kitchen cabinet. As I uncorked the wine, I noticed the label, Chateau Margaux, 1990. One of the bottles from my father's carefully curated collection, saved for special occasions. "This is quite a peace offering," I commented, pouring for both of us. He accepted a glass, taking the seat I indicated in the small living area. Seemed appropriate. It's not every day you discover your wife has been outsmarting you financially for 40 years. There was no bitterness in his tone, just a rueful acceptance that I wasn't accustomed to hearing from Richard Morgan, a man who had built his identity on being the family authority. "She wasn't trying to outsmart you," I said, sitting across from him. "She was just creating something of her own. I know that now." He took a thoughtful sip of wine. "It's taken me these past weeks to really understand it. Your mother never wanted to undermine me or the business. She just..." He paused, searching for the right words. "She needed something that was hers alone, something she built, not something she married into." The insight surprised me. "That's very perceptive, Dad." He smiled slightly. "I've had a lot of time to think lately. Sitting at the rehabilitation center, watching your mother fight to regain her speech, her movement, it changes your perspective." "How so?" "It makes you realize what matters." He looked down at his wine glass, swirling the burgundy liquid. "For most of my life, I thought what mattered was the business, the Morgan legacy, building something to pass down to my children." He glanced up at me. "When you chose not to join Morgan's, I took it personally, like you were rejecting me, not just a career path." The admission hung between us, surprisingly vulnerable from a man who had always projected strength and certainty. "It was never about rejecting you," I said quietly. "I just needed to find my own way." "I see that now. Your mother always understood it." He smiled ruefully. "She used to tell me to give you space, that you'd find your path. I thought she was just being a mother, making excuses for her daughter. I never realized she was speaking from experience, that she'd been carving out her own path right alongside mine all those years." I took a sip of wine, savoring both the rich flavor and this unexpected moment of connection with my father. "She's pretty remarkable. Always has been." He leaned forward, placing his glass on the coffee table. "Jennifer, I owe you an apology." "For what?" "For not seeing you, really seeing you, and what you've accomplished." He gestured toward the financial reports spread across my coffee table. "You built a successful career helping others manage their money. You created a life completely on your own terms. And instead of being proud, I was resentful that it wasn't the life I had planned for you." The words lodged in my throat. Emotions I hadn't allowed myself to feel for years suddenly surfacing. "Thank you," I managed finally. "That means a lot." "I spoke with your mother's financial advisors this week," he continued. "Asked them about the portfolio you're now managing. They were impressed with the questions you asked, the insights you offered." Pride, genuine pride, showed in his eyes. "They said you clearly know what you're doing." I smiled, warmed by the acknowledgement. "I should hope so. It's what I do for a living. And you do it well." He picked up his wine glass again. "Which brings me to the other reason I'm here." "Oh?" "Rebecca came to see me at the house yesterday. She's struggling with all of this." My smile faded. "I'm not surprised. She didn't exactly take Mom's news well." "No, she didn't," he agreed. "But she also doesn't have the full picture yet." "What do you mean?" My father sighed deeply. "The business, Morgan's Hardware, it's not doing as well as we've led everyone to believe. Hasn't been for several years now." The admission caught me off guard. "But Rebecca's always talking about expansion plans, increased market share, aspirational thinking," he said dryly. "The reality is that the regional big box stores have been eating away at our customer base. Overhead costs keep rising. Profit margins are razor thin." He took another sip of wine. "Last year was the first time in the company's history that we operated at a loss." I absorbed this information, pieces clicking into place. "That's why you needed the line of credit against the house." He nodded. "And why Rebecca was so upset about your mother's investments. She was hoping, we both were, that once the estate planning was finalized, we might be able to access additional capital for the business. Capital that would have come from Mom's assets," I realized. "Yes, but neither of us knew the extent of what she had built independently." He smiled wanly. "Quite the surprise to discover your wife has been quietly outperforming your family. Business for decades." "So what happens now?" I asked. "With Morgan's?" He shrugged, a gesture so uncharacteristic that it emphasized how much had changed. "That's the question, isn't it? Rebecca is determined to turn things around. She's convinced we just need to modernize, expand our online presence, focus on specialty hardware that the big box stores don't carry." "That sounds reasonable," I offered. "A solid strategy." "It would be, with adequate capital for the transition. But the business doesn't have it, and now we know your mother's resources aren't available for that purpose." The implication was clear. "You're saying Rebecca wants to change Mom's conditions, to use her share of the investments for the business. She believes it's what the family needs." I shook my head firmly. "Mom was explicit, Dad. The investments are to provide security independent of Morgan's. Diversification." "I know," he interrupted gently. "I'm not saying I agree with Rebecca. I'm just trying to help you understand where she's coming from." He leaned forward again. "Your sister has dedicated her entire adult life to a business that's slowly failing. It's not just her livelihood, it's her identity. And now she feels like she's being asked to watch it die." Put that way, I could almost sympathize with Rebecca's position. Almost. "So, what does she want from me?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "She wants to meet. To discuss possibilities." He held up a hand as I started to protest. "Just talk, Jennifer. That's all I'm asking. She's your sister." The appeal to family ties, once so effective in the Morgan household, now seemed insufficient given the stakes, but the genuine concern in my father's eyes gave me pause. "When?" "Sunday, brunch at the Cedar Room." He named the upscale restaurant where business deals in Oakwood had been negotiated for generations. "Just the two of you. Mother-daughter neutral territory." I almost laughed at the irony. The Cedar Room was anything but neutral. It was where Rebecca closed deals, entertained clients, projected the successful business image she wanted the community to see. It was her territory, not mine. But I nodded anyway. Okay, for Mom's sake. Relief washed over my father's features. Thank you. He finished his wine and stood. I should get back to the rehabilitation center. Your mother will be wondering where I am. As I walked him to the door, he paused, turning to face me. Jennifer, I want you to know something. Whatever happens with the business, with your sister, I'm proud of you. Of the woman you've become, the life you've built. I should have told you that a long time ago. The words so long wished for, finally heard, brought unexpected tears to my eyes. I stepped forward, hugging him tightly. Thanks, Dad. After he left, I stood in the quiet apartment, turning over our conversation in my mind. My father's visit had answered some questions, but raised many more. How dire was the business situation really? What exactly did Rebecca want? And most importantly, what would my mother want me to do? I reached for my phone, sending a quick text to Mark Peterson, my best friend since college, and now a corporate attorney in Chicago. We'd stayed close over the years, navigating career changes, relationships and family dramas together. If anyone could help me prepare for whatever Rebecca was planning, it was Mark. Need your legal brain, I wrote. Sister wants to discuss possibilities about family money. Pretty sure it's a trap. Can we talk tomorrow? His response came quickly. Always available for Morgan family drama. Call me in the morning. And Jen, whatever she wants, remember you hold the cards now. Sunday arrived with unseasonable warmth for Michigan in early July. I dressed carefully for brunch, a simple navy sheath dress, pearl earrings that had been a gift from my mother, hair pulled back in a sleek ponytail. Professional but not intimidating. Family appropriate but still distinctly Chicago. The Cedar Room was exactly as I remembered it from the rare special occasions when our family had dined there in my youth. Wood-paneled walls, crisp white tablecloths, waitstaff, who seemed to anticipate needs before they were expressed. Rebecca was already seated when I arrived, studying the menu with the intensity she usually reserved for quarterly reports. You're early, I observed, taking the seat across from her. She glanced up, her expression carefully neutral. Force of habit. I like to be prepared. For brunch? A flicker of irritation crossed her features. Let's not start with hostility, Jennifer. I asked for this meeting to find common ground. I lifted an eyebrow. Did you? Dad made it sound like you wanted to discuss possibilities regarding Mom's investments. That's part of finding common ground, she replied smoothly. Understanding each other's positions, needs, constraints. A waiter appeared at my elbow. May I get you something to drink, ma'am? Sparkling water with lime, please. And I'll have another mimosa, Rebecca added. When the waiter departed, I leaned forward slightly. Let's be direct, Becky. What is it you're hoping to accomplish here? The childhood nickname slipped out deliberately, a small reminder of shared history before business and money complicated everything. Rebecca's expression softened almost imperceptibly. I want to talk about the future, she said, of the business, of our family. Dad mentioned Morgan's is struggling, I acknowledged. She winced. That's an oversimplification. We're in a transitional period. Transitional from profit to loss? Temporary setbacks, she countered. The hardware industry is evolving. Independent stores like ours need to adapt or die. We have a strategy for adaptation, but it requires capital. Capital that you were counting on from Mom's assets, I said plainly. Rebecca didn't deny it. The estate plan Dad and I created assumed all family resources would be available for the greatest family need. We didn't know Mom had been building a separate financial life. And now that you do know? Now I'm trying to understand why our mother would explicitly prohibit using those resources to save a business that's been in our family for 4 generations. There was genuine bewilderment in her voice. What kind of mother doesn't want her children's legacy to continue? I considered my response carefully, remembering the conversation with Mark that morning. The kind who wants her children to have options beyond that legacy. Options? Rebecca repeated, as though the concept was foreign. Morgan's isn't just a fallback option, Jennifer. It's our heritage. It's what our grandfather built from nothing during the Depression. It's what Dad expanded into 3 locations. It's what I've dedicated my life to preserving and growing. And that was your choice, I said gently. Mom respected that choice. She also respected my choice to build something else. Our drinks arrived, creating a momentary pause in the conversation. When the waiter had taken our food orders and departed again, Rebecca fixed me with an intent stare. I need you to work with me here, Jen. Morgan's isn't just some abstract family business. It employs 27 people across 3 locations. People who have mortgages, kids in college, medical bills. If we can't make this transition to a more specialized, online-focused model, those people lose their livelihoods. The appeal was clever, shifting from family obligation to community responsibility. Rebecca had always been skilled at framing issues to her advantage. I understand that, I acknowledged. But using Mom's investments for the business directly contradicts her explicit wishes. Mom doesn't fully understand the situation, Rebecca insisted. She's been recovering from a major stroke. Her judgment is perfectly intact, I interrupted firmly. Her cognitive abilities weren't affected, Becky. You know that. The doctors have confirmed it repeatedly. She sighed, frustration evident. Fine. But even with her cognitive abilities intact, she doesn't have all the information about the business, about how dire things really are. How dire are they? I asked directly. Rebecca hesitated, calculation visible in her eyes as she weighed how much to reveal. Without significant capital injection in the next 6 months, we'll have to close the newest location. Within a year, we may need to sell the business entirely. The admission surprised me. Even in my conversation with our father, he hadn't suggested the situation was that serious. And you're looking for this capital injection to come from Mom's investments. From your half, actually, Rebecca clarified. I'm not asking to use Mom's conditions regarding my portion. That's still hers to control. I'm asking you, as my sister, to consider investing your inheritance in the family business. The request, or demand, thinly disguised, took me aback. My inheritance? Mom is still very much alive, Rebecca. You know what I mean, she said impatiently. The portion that will eventually come to you. You're already controlling it as her financial agent. For her benefit, not mine, I emphasized, and certainly not to circumvent her explicit wishes. Our food arrived, eggs Benedict for Rebecca, a simple avocado toast for me. We ate in tense silence for several minutes. What if we structured it as a loan? Rebecca finally suggested. With formal terms, interest, repayment schedule. That way it's not permanently tied to the business. It's just temporary support during this transition period. I considered this, taking a small bite of toast to buy time. And what happens if the business can't repay the loan? Rebecca's expression hardened. You mean, what happens if I fail? That's not what I said. It's what you meant. She set down her fork with deliberate precision. You've never believed in the business, Jen. You've never believed in me. That's not fair, I protested. I've always respected your choice to stay, to carry on Dad's work. I just made a different choice. And now you get to sit in judgment of my choices, she said bitterly. The prodigal daughter returns, crowned with mother's financial blessing, while I'm left begging for scraps to save what our grandfather built. The biblical allusion wasn't lost on me. In Rebecca's narrative, she was the faithful son who stayed while I was the one who squandered my inheritance in the far country of Chicago, only to return and find favor anyway. "No one is judging you," I said, keeping my voice even. "And no one is asking you to beg. I'm simply trying to honor Mom's wishes while finding a solution that works for everyone." "Then find one," she challenged. "Because right now, your position is essentially, sorry about the family business, sorry about the employees who will lose their jobs, sorry about the legacy that will die. Mom said no, so my hands are tied." Put that way, it did sound callous. But I knew there was more to consider than just the business. "What if," I said slowly, "we looked at this differently, not as a loan to the business, but as an investment in a new direction?" Rebecca's eyes narrowed. "What do you mean?" Mom's condition wasn't that her money couldn't benefit the family. It was that it couldn't be tied exclusively to Morgan's hardware as it exists now. I leaned forward. "What if we used some of the funds to help the business transition not just to online sales, but to a completely new model? Something that preserves the Morgan name and expertise but isn't vulnerable to the same market pressures." "Like what?" she asked skeptically. "I don't know exactly. That's your area of expertise, not mine. But maybe specialized consultation services for high-end renovations. Or a focused niche like sustainable building materials. Something that leverages the Morgan reputation but isn't trying to compete directly with big box stores on price or selection." Rebecca was quiet for a moment, fork suspended halfway to her mouth as she considered this. That would require completely reimagining the business. "Yes," I agreed, "but maybe that's what's needed. Not just adaptations to the existing model, but a fundamental transformation." "And you'd be willing to support that? Financially?" "I'd be willing to present the idea to Mom and Caldwell," I clarified. "If we develop a solid business plan that genuinely diversifies rather than just props up the existing structure, I think it could satisfy Mom's conditions while still preserving the Morgan legacy." Rebecca set down her fork, studying me with new intensity. "You've thought about this before today?" I nodded. After talking with Dad, I knew what this meeting would be about. I wanted to come with something constructive. "Constructive," she repeated thoughtfully. "Not just a flat refusal." "Despite what you might think, I don't want to see the business fail, Becky. I know what it means to Dad, to you." She was quiet for a long moment, absently stirring her mimosa. "It would mean starting over in a way, after all these years." "Not starting over," I corrected gently. "Evolving. Using the foundation that already exists to build something more sustainable." "And you'd be involved in this evolution?" The question carried layers of meaning beyond the simple words. She was asking if I was truly coming back to the family, if my return to Oakwood was temporary or something more permanent. "I'd be involved as an advisor," I said carefully. "My life is still in Chicago. My career is there. But I'm willing to contribute my financial expertise to help develop this new direction." She nodded slowly, a mixture of relief and disappointment in her expression. "I suppose that's more than I expected when I asked for this meeting." "What did you expect?" A small, rueful smile lifted the corner of her mouth. "Honestly, a lecture about respecting Mom's wishes and a firm no. I'm not the enemy, Rebecca. I never have been." "No," she agreed softly. "Just the sister who got to leave while I stayed behind." The simple statement held decades of complicated feelings. Envy, resentment, perhaps even admiration. "I didn't get to leave," I clarified. "I chose to leave knowing it would be harder, knowing I'd have to build something from scratch without the family safety net." "And now look at you," she said, gesturing vaguely. "Successful career, financial independence, Mom's chosen financial agent." And you have Dad's respect, the family home nearby, a purpose that's been handed down through generations, I countered. We each have things the other might envy. Rebecca considered this, then raised her mimosa glass slightly, to the grass being greener, I suppose. I lifted my water in response, and to finding common ground in the middle. We clinked glasses, a small moment of connection that felt significant after years of growing distance. As we finished our meal, the conversation shifted to more practical matters. How to approach our mother with this new idea. What kind of business plan would need to be developed? What role Caldwell would play in the discussions? By the time we left the cedar room, walking together into the bright summer sunshine, something had shifted between us. Not a complete reconciliation, not a perfect solution, but a tentative bridge across the chasm that had separated us for so long. I'll call you tomorrow, Rebecca said as we reached our cars, after I've had some time to sketch out preliminary ideas for this evolution. I look forward to it, I replied, and was surprised to realize I meant it. As I drove back to my apartment, I reflected on how differently this meeting had gone from what I'd anticipated. I had expected demands, emotional manipulation, perhaps even threats. Instead, we'd found a potential path forward that honored both my mother's wishes and the Morgan legacy. What I didn't realize then was that this tentative peace would soon be tested in ways none of us could have imagined. The true challenge wasn't finding common ground with my sister. It was maintaining that ground when everything else shifted beneath our feet. 6 months after my brunch with Rebecca, autumn arrived in Oakwood with a spectacular display of color. The maples lining Main Street blazed crimson and gold. The air took on that distinctive crispness that always reminded me of new beginnings, and my mother came home from the rehabilitation center. The homecoming was both joyous and sobering. Joyous because Eleanor Morgan had defied her doctor's more pessimistic predictions, regaining significant mobility on her right side and developing increasingly clear speech. Sobering because the colonial house where I'd grown up now contained hospital equipment, a wheelchair for longer outings, a walker for inside the house, handrails in the bathroom, a special bed in what had once been the formal dining room. It's not forever, my mother assured me as I helped her settle into the modified living space. Her speech was slow but much more intelligible now, each word carefully formed. Just until I'm stronger. I squeezed her hand. I know, Mom, and this way you get to be home with Dad. She smiled, glancing toward the kitchen where my father was fussing over the lunch he was preparing. He's changed, she observed quietly. The stroke scared him, I replied. I think he realized how much he depends on you, and not just for household things. She nodded thoughtfully. And you and Rebecca? Better now? The question was direct, characteristic of my mother's new post-stroke communication style. With fewer words at her disposal, she had abandoned the social niceties that often obscured genuine conversation. We're working on it, I answered honestly. The business transformation plan is helping. Gives us something constructive to focus on instead of old resentments. This was true, if somewhat simplified. Over the past 2 months, Rebecca and I had developed a cautious working relationship, meeting weekly to refine what we now called Morgan's 2.0, a reimagined version of the family business that would focus on sustainable building materials, high-end hardware consultation, and specialized installation services, rather than competing directly with big-box retailers on inventory and price. The plan had been presented to my mother, who had approved using a portion of her investments to fund the transition, provided the business was restructured as a new entity distinct from the original Morgan's Hardware. Caldwell had drawn up the paperwork, ensuring that both the investment and the new business structure adhered to my mother's conditions. My father had been surprisingly supportive, his initial resistance giving way to genuine enthusiasm as he saw the possibilities for preserving the Morgan name and expertise in a more sustainable form. He had even started coming to our planning meetings, offering insights from his decades of experience while deferring to Rebecca's vision for the future. It wasn't perfect. Rebecca still occasionally made cutting remarks about my Chicago perspective, or referenced my years away from the family. I still sometimes felt defensive about my choices, quick to interpret her questions as criticisms. But we were talking, really talking, for the first time in years. "Good," my mother said, patting my hand. "Family healing. Most important." I nodded, though privately I wondered if the fragile peace we'd established would last. The transformation plan was still just that, a plan. The real challenges would come with implementation, with the hard decisions about which employees to retain, which locations to close, which aspects of the traditional business to abandon. My phone chimed with a text message. Mark Peterson, informing me he'd arrived in Oakwood and was checking into his hotel. I'd asked him to come for the weekend, partly to provide legal perspective on the final business structure documents, partly because I needed a friendly face amidst the intense family dynamics. "Mark's here," I told my mother. "He'll come by for dinner tomorrow, if you're up for company." Her eyes brightened. "Mark, good boy. Always liked him." I smiled, remembering how she'd always had a soft spot for my best friend, slipping him extra cookies when he came over to study during high school. "He's looking forward to seeing you too." Just then, my father appeared in the doorway, wiping his hands on a dish towel. "Lunch is ready, just a simple soup and sandwich, but the doctor said to start with easy meals." My mother's expression softened as she looked at him. "Perfect, Richard. Thank you." The tenderness between them was palpable, strengthened rather than diminished by the health crisis. Watching them, I wondered if I would ever find that kind of enduring connection with someone. A partnership that could weather secrets, illness, and fundamental differences while still maintaining its essential bond. After lunch, I left my parents to rest and drove to the hotel where Mark was staying. The Oakwood Inn was the town's only boutique accommodation, a renovated Victorian mansion with just 12 rooms and a small but excellent restaurant on the ground floor. Mark was waiting in the lobby, his tall frame looking somewhat incongruous among the delicate antique furniture. "Jennifer Morgan," he said, breaking into a broad grin as he stood to embrace me. "Small-town girl returns triumphant." I laughed, hugging him tightly. Hardly triumphant, more like conscripted into family duty. He stepped back, studying my face. "You look good, though. Better than when I saw you in Chicago last month. Less stressed." "Things are stabilizing," I admitted as we walked toward the hotel restaurant. "Mom's home. The business plan is coming together. Rebecca and I are managing to be in the same room without World War III breaking out." "Impressive progress for the Morgan sisters," he teased, holding the restaurant door for me. Over lunch, I filled him in on the latest developments. My mother's improved condition, the final touches on the business transformation proposal, the scheduled meeting with the bank to discuss financing for the transition. "So Rebecca's fully on board now?" he asked, taking a sip of his iced tea. "No more resistance to the new direction?" I hesitated. "She's committed to the plan. Whether that's because she truly believes in it or because she sees no alternative, I'm not entirely sure. Does it matter, as long as she's cooperating?" "I think it does," I said slowly. "For the plan to work, she has to be genuinely invested in the new vision, not just going through the motions until she can find a way to revert to the old model." Mark nodded thoughtfully. "Fair point. And your father?" "He's really stepped back. From decision-making?" "More than I ever thought possible," I confirmed. Mom's stroke changed him, made him reevaluate his priorities, I think. "And what about you, Jen? Where do you fit in this new family dynamic?" The question caught me off guard. I'd been so focused on managing the immediate crises, my mother's health, the business transformation, The tentative reconciliation with my sister, that I hadn't fully considered my own place in the reconfigured Morgan family. I don't know, I admitted. I'm still based in Chicago. My career is there. But I've been in Oakwood more than not these past few months. Do you want to go back? To your life before? I stared out the window at the maple-lined street, considering. My life before was successful but somewhat isolated. I had my work, my friends, my apartment, but I was disconnected from my roots, from family, for better or worse. And now? Now I'm reconnected, but in a way that feels incomplete, like I'm straddling two worlds without fully belonging to either. Mark studied me, his expression thoughtful. You know you could build something new, something that incorporates elements of both worlds. How very diplomatic. Of you, I teased, though the suggestion resonated more than I wanted to admit. He grinned. 8 years of corporate law will do that to a person. His expression turned more serious. But I mean it, Jen. You're in a unique position. You understand both the family business world and the broader financial landscape. You could create a role that bridges those realities. Maybe, I conceded. But first we need to get through the transformation plan implementation. One identity crisis at a time, please. He laughed, raising his glass in a mock toast. 2 sequential identity crises, then. We spent the rest of the afternoon reviewing the legal documents for Morgan's 2.0, Mark offering suggestions for clearer language and stronger protections, for both the investment and the new business structure. By the time we finished, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the hotel's garden. Dinner? Mark suggested. My treat, to celebrate your mother's homecoming. I checked my watch. Actually, I should get back. Mom's first night home. I want to make sure she and Dad are settling in okay. He nodded, understanding without offense. Tomorrow, then. I'm looking forward to seeing Eleanor again. I hugged him goodbye, grateful for his steady presence amid the family turbulence. As I drove back to my parents' house, I reflected on his question about where I fit in the new family dynamic. It was a question I would need to answer soon, as my leave of absence from my Chicago firm was nearing its end. The house was quiet when I arrived, lights glowing softly in the living room. I found my parents there, my mother in her special chair, with adaptive supports, my father reading aloud from a novel they'd started during her hospital stay. The scene was so peacefully domestic that I paused in the doorway, reluctant to interrupt. My father looked up, smiling when he saw me. "Jennifer, how was your meeting with Mark?" "Productive," I replied, sitting on the sofa across from them. "He has some suggestions for the final documents, but nothing major." My mother studied my face. "Something else bothering you?" Even with impaired speech, she could read me like no one else. I smiled ruefully. "Just thinking about next steps. My leave from work ends in 3 weeks." "You're going back to Chicago," my father said. It wasn't a question, but there was no resentment in his tone, just acceptance. "I need to," I confirmed. "At least for now. I have clients, commitments." My mother nodded slowly. "But not forever," she said, the words carefully formed. "You'll visit. More than before." "Definitely more than before," I assured her. "And with technology, I can be involved in Morgan's 2.0 remotely. Video conferences, digital documents. Location matters less now." "It's not the same," my father said quietly. "No," I agreed. "It's not. But it's a balance I need to find, between my career there and my family here." My mother reached for my hand. "You'll find it. Always do." Her confidence warmed me, a reminder of how she had always supported my independence even when it took me away from Oakwood. "I hope so, Mom." "Rebecca coming tonight?" my father asked, changing the subject. "She said she'd stop by after dinner," I replied. "Wanted to give you two some quiet time to settle in first." He nodded, pleased. "Good. We can discuss the bank meeting tomorrow, all of us together. The all of us together struck me, a new concept in the Morgan family vocabulary. For so long, family discussions had been divided: business matters between my father and Rebecca, household matters between my parents, periodic updates to me during phone calls or holiday visits. Now, increasingly, decisions were being made, collectively, with each person's perspective valued. My mother must have been thinking along similar lines. "Family council," she said with satisfaction. "Like I always wanted." My father looked at her in surprise. "You wanted family councils? You never said anything." "You never asked," she replied simply. "You decided." The observation held no bitterness, just a statement of fact. My father absorbed it, nodding slowly. "That's changing," he promised. "That has changed." She smiled, squeezing his hand. "Yes, good change." The doorbell rang, interrupting the moment. "That's probably Rebecca," I said, rising to answer it. But when I opened the front door, it wasn't my sister standing on the porch. It was Thomas Caldwell, his expression grave. "Ms. Morgan?" he said formally. "I apologize for the unannounced visit, but there's a matter of some urgency we need to discuss. Is your mother available?" A chill ran through me. "She's home from rehab as of today." "What's happened?" He glanced past me into the house. "I think it's best if I explain to everyone at once." I led him to the living room, a sense of foreboding, growing with each step. My parents looked up in surprise when they saw him. "Thomas," my mother said, straightening in her chair. "What's wrong?" He took a seat, his posture rigid with tension. "Mrs. Morgan, Mr. Morgan, I've just come from a rather disturbing meeting with Jim Parsons." "Dad's lawyer?" I questioned. "Why would you be meeting with him?" "He requested the meeting," Caldwell explained, "regarding the new business entity and the investment framework we've been developing." My father frowned. "I didn't authorize any meeting between our lawyers." "No," Caldwell agreed. "You didn't. But apparently Ms. Rebecca Morgan did." The atmosphere in the room shifted, tension crystallizing around my sister's name. "What exactly happened in this meeting?" I asked carefully. Caldwell removed a document from his briefcase. "Mr. Parsons presented me with this, a draft petition, challenging Mrs. Morgan's cognitive capacity to make financial decisions." My mother gasped. My father's face drained of color. "A petition claiming what?" I demanded, taking the document from Caldwell's outstretched hand. "Claiming that due to her stroke, Mrs. Morgan lacks the capacity to manage her own financial affairs or designate others to do so," he said grimly. "If successful, it would invalidate the power of attorney she granted you and potentially place all her assets under court supervision, with Rebecca as the recommended conservator." I scanned the document, legal terminology swimming before my eyes. "This is ridiculous. Mom's doctors have consistently confirmed her cognitive abilities are intact. Her speech is impaired, not her thinking." "Which is precisely what I told Mr. Parsons," Caldwell assured us. "But the petition includes selective quotations from medical records focusing on the early days after the stroke, when Mrs. Morgan's condition was still being assessed." My father stood abruptly, his face flushed with anger. "Rebecca wouldn't do this. There must be some mistake." "I'm afraid the petition bears her signature as the initiating party," Caldwell said quietly. "It's already been filed with the court. A hearing date has been set for 2 weeks from now." My mother's hands trembled in her lap. "Why?" she asked. The single word, laden with hurt. No one had an immediate answer. The betrayal was so unexpected, so contrary to the cooperative spirit of the past 2 months, that it defied explanation. "The timing is significant," Caldwell observed after a moment. "The business transformation documents are scheduled to be finalized next week. This petition, if successful, would halt that process." She's trying to stop Morgan's 2-0, I realized. Aloud. But why now? Why after all the work we've done together? The front door opened before anyone could respond, and Rebecca herself walked into the house. "Hello? Mom? Dad?" she called from the entryway. For a moment, we all sat frozen, in the living room, the damning document in my hands like a live grenade. Then my father stood. "In here," he called, his voice tight with controlled anger. Rebecca appeared in the doorway, her smile fading as she took in Caldwell's presence and our expressions. "What's going on? Why is he here?" My father gestured to the document in my hands. "Perhaps you should explain that to us." She glanced at the petition, then lifted her chin defiantly. I see Parsons moved faster than expected. "You admit it then?" I asked, disbelief giving way to anger. "You're actually trying to have Mom declared incompetent?" "Not incompetent," she corrected with lawyerly precision. "Just impaired in her capacity to make complex financial decisions, which any reasonable person would acknowledge is true following a massive stroke. Any reasonable person would also acknowledge that her doctors have consistently confirmed her cognitive functions are intact," I countered. "This is transparent, Rebecca. Even for you." She flinched slightly at the condemnation but held her ground. "This isn't personal, Jen. It's about protecting the family's interests." "The family's interests?" my father echoed incredulously. "Or your interest in controlling everything?" Rebecca's gaze shifted to him, surprise briefly crossing her features. She had clearly expected his support, or at least his neutrality. "Dad, you know as well as I do that Mom's judgment has been affected. All those years keeping financial secrets, and now this rush to dismantle the business you built." "Enough," my mother interrupted, her voice stronger than I'd heard since before the stroke. "Not his business. Our business, and not dismantling, evolving." Rebecca's expression softened slightly as she addressed our mother. "Mom, I know you believe that, but you're being influenced by Jen's outsider perspective. She doesn't understand the history, the community connections, the legacy." "Don't," I warned, anger sharpening my voice. "Don't try to manipulate her by playing the loyalty card. Not after filing this." Rebecca ignored me, focusing entirely on our mother. "I'm trying to protect what our family has built, what you and Dad created together. Can't you see that?" My mother studied her daughter for a long moment, disappointment evident in her gaze. "See clearly," she said finally. "You fear change, fear losing control." Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. "I fear watching our family heritage being dismantled by someone who walked away from it a decade ago." And there it was, the core of the issue, the resentment that had never fully healed despite our recent collaboration. In Rebecca's mind, I was still the deserter, the one who had abandoned the family business. Any influence I had over its future was, therefore, illegitimate. "This isn't about Jennifer," my father said quietly. "This is about your mother's right to make her own decisions about her own money." Rebecca turned to him, desperation edging into her voice. "Dad, please. You know what Morgan's means to this family, to this town. We can't just let it transform into some trendy boutique operation because Jen thinks the traditional model is outdated." "That trendy boutique operation is the only viable path forward," I countered. "The traditional model is failing, Rebecca. You know that. You've seen the numbers. We just need more time, more capital, which you hoped to get by invalidating Mom's power of attorney," I finished for her, "so you could access her investments without the conditions she put in place." Caldwell, who had been observing silently, cleared his throat. "Ms. Morgan, I should inform you that this petition has very little chance of success given the medical documentation of your mother's cognitive capacity. Its primary effect will be to delay the business transformation process and cause considerable Distress to your family? Rebecca's jaw tightened. I have medical experts who will testify that stroke victims often appear more coherent than they are, especially regarding complex financial matters. Stop, my mother said firmly, struggling to rise from her chair. My father moved to assist, supporting her as she stood to face her elder daughter. Rebecca, look at me. Rebecca met her gaze reluctantly. I am your mother, Eleanor said, each word carefully enunciated. Stroke didn't change that. Didn't change my mind. My wishes. She took a labored breath. Withdraw petition. Now. The direct command, delivered with such maternal authority, seemed to penetrate Rebecca's defensive shell. For a moment, she looked like a chastened child rather than a successful businesswoman. Mom, I'm trying to protect our legacy, she said, her voice smaller. Legacy, not just business, my mother replied. Legacy is values, how we treat each other. She gestured. Between Rebecca and me. Sisters, family, that's true legacy. Rebecca's eyes filled with unexpected tears. It's all changing. Everything we built, everything we planned, it's slipping away. My anger faltered in the face of her genuine distress. For the first time, I truly grasped how destabilizing these past months had been for her. Our mother's stroke, the revelation of the secret investments, my return to Oakwood, the business transformation plan. Her entire identity was bound up in Morgan's hardware as it had always been. Its evolution threatened not just her professional role, but her sense of self. It's not slipping away, I said more gently. It's changing form, not disappearing. The Morgan expertise, the Morgan name, the Morgan commitment to quality, all of that continues in the new model. But differently, she insisted. Not the way Grandpa and Dad built it. Times change, Becky, my father said, using the childhood nickname with obvious affection. Businesses must change too. I resisted that truth for too long, and it nearly cost us everything. But my whole life has been dedicated to preserving what you built, she said, a tear escaping down her cheek. And now your life can be dedicated to building something new, he suggested. Something that honors the past but isn't trapped by… My mother nodded approvingly. Exactly right. Rebecca looked between them, then at me, then at Caldwell with his damning document. The fight seemed to drain out of her gradually, her shoulders slumping. I'll withdraw the petition, she said finally. I'll call Parsons tonight. Relief washed through the room, though the hurt of her action remained like a bruise beneath the surface. Thank you, my mother said simply. Rebecca nodded, then turned to leave, clearly eager to escape the emotional intensity of the moment. Rebecca, I called after her. Wait. She paused, not turning around. We still need you, I said quietly. Your knowledge, your community connections, your relationship with the employees, all of that is essential to making Morgan's 2.0 work. This was never about pushing you out. She glanced back, her expression vulnerable in a way I hadn't seen since we were children. You mean that? Of course, I affirmed. You're a Morgan. More than any of us, you understand what that name means in this community. We can't build the new business without you. 6 months later, Morgan's 2.0 officially launched with a community open house that transformed the original downtown location into a showcase for sustainable building materials and specialized hardware solutions. The event drew over 300 people, impressive for a town of Oakwood's size, with local news coverage and congratulatory messages from business leaders throughout the region. I watched from the sidelines as Rebecca commanded the room, confidently explaining the new business model to longtime customers and curious newcomers alike. She looked different somehow, more assured, but less rigid, passionate about the future, rather than defensive about the past. The transformation plan had ultimately become her vision as much as mine, her practical knowledge of the local market balancing my financial strategies. My father stood nearby, pride evident as he introduced Rebecca as the president of Morgan's Sustainable Building Solutions. The new name had been her idea, honoring the family legacy while clearly signaling the shift in focus. No one would mistake this for the old hardware store, yet the Morgan commitment to quality and service remained unmistakable. My mother moved through the crowd in her wheelchair, which she now used primarily for longer outings to conserve energy. Her speech had improved dramatically, though she still occasionally struggled with complex sentences. What hadn't changed was her perceptiveness. She caught my eye across the room and gestured for me to join her near the custom cabinetry display. "Success," she said simply when I reached her side. I smiled, surveying the buzzing showroom. "It certainly looks that way." Opening day exceeded projections by 30%. "Not business," she clarified, pointing discreetly toward Rebecca, who was now deep in conversation with the mayor. Her, finding her way. I nodded, understanding. She's really embraced the new direction, made it her own. "And you?" my mother asked, studying my face. "Finding balance?" That was the question, wasn't it? For the past 6 months, I'd been living a divided life. 3 weeks in Chicago maintaining my client relationships, 1 week in Oakwood working on Morgan's 2.0. The arrangement had been necessary during the transition, but it was taking its toll both professionally and personally. "Still working on it," I admitted. "The remote arrangement isn't ideal long-term." She nodded, unsurprised. "Decision coming?" "Soon," I confirmed. "My firm in Chicago has offered me partnership, which would mean committing fully to that path. But Mark and I have also been discussing other possibilities." My mother's eyebrows rose. "Mark? Professional or personal?" I felt heat rise to my cheeks. My friendship with Mark had evolved over these past months, deepening into something neither of us had named yet, but both recognized was shifting beyond platonic territory. "Both, potentially," I acknowledged. "He's considering opening a branch office of his firm in Grand Rapids to handle business law for Western Michigan clients. It would mean he'd be just an hour from Oakwood." "And you?" she prompted. "I could open my own financial consulting practice," I said, giving voice to the idea that had been forming for months. "Focus on family businesses in transition, helping them navigate the same kind of evolution Morgan's has undergone. I could base it in Grand Rapids, but serve clients throughout the Midwest." My mother's eyes brightened. "Your own path, not Chicago, not Oakwood, something new." "Exactly," I said, relief flooding through me at her immediate understanding. "Not abandoning either world, but creating something that bridges them." "Perfect for you," she declared with conviction. 1 month after the launch, I sat in my Chicago apartment surrounded by packing boxes, sorting through the life I'd built there over the past decade. The decision to leave had been both harder and easier than I'd expected. Harder because it meant walking away from a partnership offer. Easier because I felt pulled toward rather than pushed away from my next chapter. Mark had already secured office space in Grand Rapids, with room for both his legal practice and my new consulting firm. My mother had become my first official client, engaging me to help other family businesses navigate succession planning with an emphasis on preserving individual autonomy within family frameworks. Rebecca and I spoke weekly, our conversations evolving from strictly business matters to include personal topics. Her new relationship with a local architect, my developing romance with Mark, our mother's continued recovery. The old resentments hadn't vanished entirely, but they had receded, allowing space for a more authentic sister relationship to emerge. As I sealed the last box, my phone rang, my mother calling from Oakwood. "Just checking," she said, her speech now flowing more easily. Still coming Sunday? Wouldn't miss it, I assured her. First official Morgan family council dinner. I'm bringing dessert. And Mark? I smiled. He'll be there too. Good. She paused, then added more softly, proud of you, Jennifer. Building your own way. The simple acknowledgement warmed me deeply. Thanks, Mom. For everything. After we hung up, I stood at my window, gazing out at the Chicago skyline one last time as a resident rather than a visitor. The city had given me so much: independence, professional growth, the confidence to forge my own path. But it was time to create something new, something that honored both where I'd come from and where I'd been. The next morning, as I loaded the last of my belongings into the moving truck, I reflected on the journey that had begun with a simple text message from my father. Your sister will be handling all family affairs going forward. Please direct any questions to her. What had seemed like an ending, the final severing of my place in the Morgan family, had instead become the catalyst for transformation. My mother's secret letter, intended as protection against uncertainty, had ultimately opened the door to a more authentic family dynamic, where differences were valued rather than merely tolerated. As I pulled away from my Chicago apartment for the last time, heading west toward Michigan and my new life, I felt a sense of completion. Not an ending, but a circle drawn around these past tumultuous months, connecting their challenges and revelations into a coherent whole. My mother's investments would continue to provide security for both her daughters, but her true legacy was something far more valuable: the courage to forge independent paths while maintaining the bonds of family, the wisdom to see that true strength comes not from control, but from flexibility, and the understanding that the most important inheritance isn't measured in dollars, but in values that endure across generations. 3 hours later, as the "Welcome to Michigan" sign appeared on the horizon, I smiled, feeling not like I was leaving something behind, but rather moving toward a future where all parts of myself, the independent professional, the Morgan daughter, the sister, the emerging partner to Mark, could finally exist in harmony. The journey home, I realized, had never been about returning to a physical place. It had been about finding a way to honor both roots and wings, a balance my mother had always understood, even when the rest of us couldn't see it. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.